first duty of a revolutionary is to be educated. A country that does not know how to read and write is easy to deceive. Che Guevara. Today I'm going to try to briefly simplify the complex relations between the US and Cuba. After the Spanish American War, the US oversaw the creation of the Cuban Constitution. The US spent the first 60 years of the 20th century maintaining direct control over Cuban elections, land, and industry. And with an influx of tourism and military personnel, tensions began to rise between US-backed regimes and the people of Cuba. One of these regimes started as a coup led by a military sergeant named Fulgencio Batista, who took control over the army and overthrew a provisional regime in 1933. Batista was officially elected in 1940 and led an effective government, expanding the educational system and growing the economy. When his term ended, Batista moved to Florida, and he invested much of the wealth he amassed as president. While he was away, however, corruption began to fester within the Cuban government. Public services began to fail as a result. He returned to Cuba in 1952 and enacted a bloodless coup with the support of the military and was widely welcomed. But Batista came back to Cuba as a brutal dictator, controlling the press and Congress, as well as embezzling money for himself as the economy began to soar. In 1957, trade unionists attempted to incite a general strike, but support fell through when the government announced participating in the strike would result in being refused re-employment elsewhere. Batista then suspended constitutional rights like freedom of assembly and freedom of expression. In 1958, after Batista had manipulated the election by stuffing ballot boxes, his support began to suffer with the Cuban people, beginning to favor the rebels. Batista's army, though still loyal, were beginning to lose its effectiveness due to an arms embargo from the US due to rising violence in Cuba. Castro's forces were now on an even playing field and in some cases having superior weapons. With Batista's military in desperate need of firepower, a rebel force under Che Guevara's lead seized and derailed a train loaded with arms and ammunition. With Batista realizing his vulnerable position, he fled the country, not without stealing $500 million worth of cash, art, and assets. The revolution and overthrow of the authoritarian regime led by Fidel Castro ushered in a new era of progress for the people of Cuba. Literacy programs were established in 1961 to eliminate illiteracy, which they did so successfully in 1 year, which was declared the Year of Education. Castro had placed a heavy importance on education for the Cuban people, with a vision for citizens to be students, volunteers, mentors, and teachers, inspired by moral interests instead of the material. Over half of the volunteers for the literacy campaign were women, displaying their crucial role in the revolution, despite still facing patriarchal systems previously held. And today, the Cuban literacy rate is essentially 100%. US businesses began refusing to work with the new government, which essentially forced Cuba to nationalize their industry and redistribute land previously owned by upper-class and US-owned companies. After nationalizing their industry, there were many US-backed attempts on Fidel Castro's life and failed coup plots, including the Bay of Pigs invasion, which was a CIA operation to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro's socialist regime. And after the US's failed invasion, the US cut ties with Cuba and effectively placed some of the most severe sanctions in history on them. This is known as the embargo. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the US tightened its embargo by banning US companies and subsidiaries from trading with Cuba. The impacts of the embargo, which limits the inflow of essential goods like food and medicines, have only exacerbated the ever-increasing food crisis that Cuba faces today. After the COVID pandemic, tourism in Cuba took a hit and its economy suffered. The US also intensified sanctions on medical supplies like syringes during that time. Despite these challenges brought about by the embargo, Cuba still manages to house its people. Though it's not perfect, specifically on the countryside, Cuba has a home ownership rate of 90%. They don't pay mortgage, land, or property tax, just utilities and maintenance. And since 1976, the Cuban Constitution has recognized free healthcare as a right that all Cubans are entitled to, with a heavy focus on preventative care. Cuba lacks access to the equipment and medicine required to treat these more advanced illnesses, partially due to the embargo. But due to preventative care, Cuba has the lower cancer death rate per 100,000 citizens than the US. Cuba also provides free education from kindergarten to PhD level academia. Thank you.